Voting in the United States is often described as a cornerstone of democracy. Yet, at the same time, it is also one of the most debated and controversial aspects of American public life. Some argue the system protects federalism and state authority. Others believe it creates inequality in representation. Some see safeguards against fraud. Others see barriers to participation. So why is voting in America so controversial? To understand this, we need to look beyond headlines and examine the structure, history, and legal framework of U.S. elections. In this video, we'll explore how the American voting system is structured, why authority over elections is divided, the Electoral College debate, voter ID laws and access issues, mail-in voting controversies, gerrymandering and district design, historical voting rights struggles, and why disagreement persists. This is not a partisan video. It is an explanation of how and why debate exists. Part 1. A system built on federalism. One of the biggest reasons voting in America is controversial is structural. The United States is a federal system. That means power is divided between the national government and the states. Under the U.S. Constitution, states have primary authority over how elections are conducted. There is no single national voting system. Each state decides how voter registration works, what identification is required, whether early voting is allowed, whether mail-in voting is broadly available, how ballots are designed, how votes are counted. This decentralized system leads to variation. For example, Oregon conducts elections almost entirely by mail. Texas has more restrictions on mail voting eligibility. Georgia requires specific forms of voter ID. Supporters of decentralization argue this protects state sovereignty and allows experimentation. Critics argue it creates inconsistency and confusion. The controversy begins here. Americans are voting under 50 different sets of rules. Part 2. The Electoral College. Another major source of controversy is the presidential election system itself. The U.S. does not elect presidents by direct nationwide popular vote. Instead, it uses the United States Electoral College. There are 538 electors. A candidate must receive 270 electoral votes to win. Most states use a winner-take-all system, meaning the candidate who wins the popular vote in that state receives all its electoral votes. This structure has led to situations where a candidate wins the presidency without winning the nationwide popular vote. In modern history, this occurred in George W. Bush in 2000 and Donald Trump in 2016. Supporters argue the Electoral College protects smaller states, preserves federal balance, encourages geographically broad coalitions. Critics argue it overrepresents less populous states, undervalues votes in large states, allows outcomes that differ from the popular vote. Because the Constitution establishes this system, changing it would require a constitutional amendment, a very high legal threshold. Part 3. Voter ID laws. Voter identification requirements are another recurring debate. Some states require government-issued photo ID to vote in person. Others accept non-photo identification or do not require ID beyond voter registration confirmation. Supporters of voter ID laws argue they protect election security. They increase public confidence. Identification is required for many daily activities. Opponents argue strict ID requirements may disproportionately affect certain populations. Obtaining qualifying ID can present barriers for some voters. Studies on the impact of voter ID laws show mixed findings depending on methodology and state context. This issue remains controversial because it involves balancing two principles: election security and voter access. Part 4. Mail-in voting and early voting. Mail-in voting expanded significantly during the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. States such as California and Colorado sent ballots broadly to registered voters. Supporters argue mail voting increases convenience, improves turnout, has long-standing use in several states. Critics argue it increases administrative complexity. Signature verification systems vary. It can create delays in counting. Multiple court cases after the 2020 election examined allegations of irregularities. Courts across jurisdictions dismissed many claims due to insufficient evidence or lack of legal standing. However, public disagreement over procedures has persisted. The controversy often reflects broader political distrust rather than confirmed systemic fraud. Part 5. Gerrymandering. Gerrymandering refers to drawing electoral district boundaries in a way that benefits one political party. District maps are typically redrawn every 10 years after the census. Both major parties have engaged in redistricting strategies when controlling state legislatures. Supporters argue redistricting is a normal legislative function. Critics argue extreme gerrymandering reduces competitive elections and weakens voter influence. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled in 2019 that partisan gerrymandering claims present political questions beyond federal court jurisdiction, leaving reform largely to states. Some states now use independent redistricting commissions to reduce partisan influence. This debate centers on representation fairness. Part 6. Historical context. Voting rights. Voting controversy in America cannot be understood without history. Originally, voting rights were limited largely to white male property owners. Key milestones include the 15th Amendment, 1870, prohibiting racial discrimination in voting; the 19th Amendment, 1920, granting women the right to vote; the 24th Amendment, 1964, banning poll taxes; the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 aimed to prevent racial discrimination in voting practices. In 2013, the Supreme Court's decision in Shelby County v. Holder invalidated part of the Act's pre-clearance formula, altering federal oversight of certain states' voting law changes. Supporters of the ruling argued it reflected changed conditions. Critics argued it weakened protections. Historical memory shapes present-day debates. Part 8. Election administration and trust. Another layer of controversy concerns public trust. Election administration involves local officials, state officials, courts, and federal oversight in limited contexts. Because elections are decentralized, outcomes are certified state by state. Delays in counting, especially when large numbers of mail ballots are involved, can create public uncertainty. Transparency mechanisms include bipartisan observers, public audit procedures, court challenges. Despite these processes, political polarization affects how outcomes are perceived. Trust in elections varies across demographic and partisan groups. Part 9. Why controversy persists. Voting in America is controversial for structural reasons. Decentralization creates variation. The Electoral College can diverge from the popular vote. Access versus security debates are ongoing. Historical injustices inform present distrust. Political polarization amplifies disagreement. Many controversies stem not from a single flaw, but from competing values: equality versus federalism, simplicity versus safeguards, uniformity versus state autonomy. Reasonable people disagree about which values should take priority. Conclusion. Voting in the United States is controversial not because democracy is absent, but because democracy is structured in a specific constitutional framework that balances multiple principles. It is a system shaped by history, federalism, and legal precedent. Debates over voting laws reflect broader questions about representation, fairness, and trust. Understanding the structure helps explain the controversy, and informed discussion depends on accurate information.